Okay. So good evening, everyone. We're learning this week the Parsha of Vayeira. It's the fourth Parsha of the book of Genesis. It's a directly connected to last week. In other words, last week we started learning about Abraham, the one who became the father of the Jewish nation, the first of our three forefathers. And we learned about his early life. And specifically in last week's Parsha, we covered age 75 to 99 of Abraham's life. And last week's Parsha concluded with Abraham at the age of 99 being told by God to circumcise himself. His name was changed from Abram to Abraham. His wife was changed from Sarai to Sarah. And that's how we concluded our Parsha. This week's Parsha continues from that point. And we're told that after the circumcision, just a few days later, God pays Abram a visit. He sits at the entrance of his tent, and Abraham notices that there are three travelers passing by, and he runs to invite them into his home. He loves having guests. The passerbys were actually angels in human disguise, accepted the invitation. Abraham and Sarah prepared a feast for them. And the angels inform Abraham that Sarah would give birth to a child exactly 1 year later. She's 89 years old at this time. Sarah is way past menopause age, and she hears this assurance and she laughs. But God was not happy with Sarah's lack of faith. The angels depart, and Abraham starts escorting them on their journey. Where are they journeying to? They're journeying to the region of Sodom, to destroy the 5 cities of that region, and to rescue Lot, Abram's brother-in-law and Abram's nephew, and his family that reside there. God tells Abraham of his plan, that he's going to destroy Sodom because of the evil inhabitants, and Abraham attempts to save the region. He starts arguing or pleading with God to save them. He says, maybe there are 50 tzaddikim, maybe there are 50 righteous people there. Maybe there are 40, maybe there are 30, maybe there are 10, but even 10 righteous people were not found. And Abraham sort of lifts up his hands. There's nothing he can do. And we're told he goes back to his home. The angels arrive at Sodom. Lot invites them into his home to eat, to rest. Word of the guests spread throughout the city. This is a city that really did not appreciate any act of kindness, and they were incensed, and they surrounded Lot's house. The residents of Sodom surrounded Lot's house. They wanted to assault the guests. Lot refused to give in to their demands, and as they prepared to break down the door, the angels struck all those surrounding the house with blindness. The angels inform Lot of their mission. They encourage him to run to leave with him, to flee. Lot, his wife, and 2 of his daughters were escorted out of the city to safety, but they were warned not to look back as the city was destroyed. And God rained fire and sulfur on Sodom. The entire region was overturned, but Lot's wife does look back, and she's transformed into a pillar of salt, and that's she's transformed into a pillar of salt. Lot and his daughters took shelter in a cave, and assuming that the entire world was destroyed, similar to what happened after the flood, Lot's daughters intoxicated their father with wine, and they seduce him in order to repopulate the world. They think there's no one else alive. They each give birth to a son. This has become the beginning of the tribes of the Moabite nation and the Ammonite nation that come from these children. One was named Ammon, one was named Moab. After that, we go back to Abraham. Abraham relocates to the city of Gerar in the land of the Pelishtim in the Philistine area. Avimelech, the king of the Philistines, takes Sarah, who was presented again as Avram's sister, similar to what happened last week with Pharaoh, and God afflicts the members of Avimelech's palace with a disease. He appears to Avimelech in a dream and warns him to return Sarah to her husband. Avimelech obeys. He showers Abraham and Sarah with gifts, and he and his household were healed. Sarah conceived at the age of 99 to a son. He was called Yitzchak, Isaac, and Avraham circumcised Yitzchak when he was 8 days old, as he was told by God a year previously, that from now on everyone should be circumcised at the age of 8 days. And we learned that Yitzchak grew up. Sarah did not appreciate the way Yishmael, Yitzchak's half-brother, was having a negative influence on his child, and she demands from Abraham to expel Yishmael along with his mother Hagar from the household. God tells Abraham, whatever Sarah tells you, listen to her voice. Hagar and Yishmael wandered in the desert. They ran out of water. Yishmael was about to perish just out of sheer thirst, and an angel opens up Hagar's eyes and shows her a well of water. And we're told Yishmael grows up in the desert. He became a skilled hunter and archer. Avimelech approaches Abraham. He wants to make a treaty with them that they should not harm each other. Avram agrees, but there's a disagreement regarding a well of water that was dug up by Abraham, and it was stolen by Avimelech's subjects. Avram set apart. He tells them to make a testimony. They dig the well. Avram plants the orchard, and he establishes an inn in the Be'er Sheva, and he proclaims Hashem's name to all those that pass by. And at the very end of the parsha, we're told about the 10th test that God tests Avraham with, from last week's parsha to this week's parsha. From the beginning of last week, Lech Lecha, up until this week, we have 10 trials and tribulations that Avraham goes through. And the final, the most famous one perhaps, is where God commands Avraham to take Yitzchak and offer him as a sacrifice on the mountain. Avraham takes Yitzchak and the provisions. He sets out for the mountain. He arrives at the mountain. He builds the altar. He bounds up Isaac. And as he's about to he stretches out his hand to take the knife, an angel orders him to stop. Avram offers a ram instead of his son, and Hashem promises Avram great blessings as a reward for passing this test. And then at the very end of the parsha, we're told that Avram is notified that his sister-in-law had given birth to children. One of the children is Besuel, his nephew, who was the father of Rebecca, who eventually becomes Yitzchak's wife, as we're going to learn in next week's parsha. So this is the summary of what takes place in this parsha. There's a lot of interesting stories and details. Last year, we talked at length about the idea of angels. What are angels? Were these actual people? Were they spiritual things? So that was a discussion we had last year. 2 years ago, we focused on the last of the 10 trials, about this idea of God telling Abram to sacrifice his son. What is the meaning behind that? And tonight, I want to spend time, we're going to focus on one small story, perhaps fascinating, which is the story of Lot's wife. Lot's wife, who turns into a pillar of salt. Probably one of the more overlooked stories in the Torah. There's not that many commentaries that analyze the story, and it's quite a strange episode. Now, when we think about it, what's the meaning behind such a punishment, where a living human being is transformed into an inanimate pillar of salt? And we know that God visits very specific punishments on people to impart a lesson or to transmit a message. What's the story here? What's this idea of a pillar of salt? Why salt? Maybe she should have been transformed into black pepper, garlic powder. What's special about salt? When we think about salt, is really one of the salt is a staple. It's a basic staple of life. It's a required ingredient of every sacrifice. Every korban that is brought on the altar had to have salt. Right? We have it on every table when we eat challah or bread. We dip it into salt, and here it becomes a symbol for death. So there's got to be some meaning there. And then we think about Lot. What was the big Lot's wife? What did she do? She turned around. She looked back. Okay, she was told not to turn around. Why is that such a terrible thing to do? Right, this was her home for years. She lived there. So it's not so easy to turn around and just to leave without so much as a farewell. Why is that such a big deal? Right, so these are really fascinating questions to think about. And the other element to this is when we think about this idea, that we realize that this pillar of salt is by many thought to be still standing to this very day. The Talmud actually prescribes a special bracha, a special blessing that one should recite when they encounter the pillar of salt, that which was Lot's wife. And whether we think we know where it is or we don't, but the very fact that the Talmud, the rabbis in the Talmud, prescribe a blessing for it is really demonstrating that there's an eternal message. There's something important. There's a meaning behind this whole story. Right. So today there's all different type of researches that were done, really different ideas about where this rock stood in the area of Sodom. Sodom was located in the southeast of Israel, near the Dead Sea. So there are scholars that argue that the Dead Sea itself was the actual plate that God overturned and burnt into salt. That's one theory. It's 1,240 feet below sea level, the lowest elevation on the planet, and it's about 10 times saltier than the ocean. Right? No fish can survive, no plants can live there. It corrodes most substances. That's why they call it the Dead Sea, because of all the quantity of salt that really kill all potential life, all growth. So if you go to visit the Dead Sea area, many tour guides in Israel will show you what has been named Lot's wife. There's a pillar of what they call halite rock salt, and some say that it bears a resemblance to a woman wearing a shawl. It's located on an area today which is called Mount Sodom. It's on a hill that's on the southwest bank of the Dead Sea. Okay, but no one really knows for sure if that is really Lot's wife. Here's a picture. I just Googled it on Google this morning. This is what shows up when you talk about Lot's wife. Here's a nice picture. This is what they say is perhaps the pillar of salt. Whether you think it is or not, I'll leave that up to you. Okay, so that's possibly what we would say is Lot's wife. So let's talk about this story. Let's start from the beginning. Okay, Sodom, the area of Sodom was a land of abundance. It had unbelievable potential, possibilities. It was a beautiful, prosperous, safe, like today they would call it a beautiful gated community in an American suburb. Probably they had a great school system. That's why Avram's nephew Lot chose to live there. It was a land that was blessed with great, minerals and metals and agriculture. The soil grew very nicely. They talk about this was like a land where milk and honey flowed from the trees. So it was a great place to live. But on the other hand, the people of Sodom, they looked left and they looked right, to one side, the other side, and they saw that they were like an island of blessing in a very negative region. All around is the Negev, the desert, dry from water. So the residents in those places suffer from droughts to lead to hunger. The land of Canaan did not have that much blessings. So the land of Canaan as a whole wasn't blessed with so many natural treasures. So the people of Sodom, the Sodomites, or whatever you want to call them, were frightened. Right? Maybe we're going to run out of money if we're going to let everyone come into our neighborhood. We're going to run out of resources. We're afraid that strangers are going to come settle amongst us, and then we're going to have to share with them. And worse, even, poor people are going to start coming, and they're going to ask for charity. And when one poor person gets charity, another one's going to follow him, and there's going to be waves of people wanting to immigrate and enter our beautiful gated neighborhood. And we're going to have nothing left. So what was their solution? Close the gates. Let's lock it up. And not only are we going to close the gates, we're going to enact decrees that ensure that the gates of the city are going to remain closed, to the extent that we don't even want people passing by temporarily. Even if some people want to stay overnight, not a good idea. To the extent they're going to pass laws where it's forbidden to support the poor person who has come to the city. This is how we're told, again, in the Torah itself, we see that the Torah, even last Parsha, okay, Lot moved to the Sodom region when he separated with Abraham 25 years before this destruction. Okay, last week's Parsha took place shortly after Abraham entered the land of Canaan, came back from Egypt. He and Lot parted ways, and Lot lived in Sodom for about 25 years. At that point, God calls Sodom a negative place. Let's take a look at the quote from last week's Parsha. Here's what Torah says last week. It says, Abram Yashav Be'eretz Canaan, Abraham dwelt in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelt in the cities of the plain, and he pitched his tents until Sodom. And the Torah right away tells you the people of Sodom were evil. They were sinful against Hashem. So we know that Sodom, but the Torah doesn't specifically describe what was wrong, like what was their specific ideology or evilness. But here's how the Talmud describes it. Okay, the Talmud, the oral Torah, describes at length many issues that the people of Sodom and their terrible decrees that they decreed. So here's what the Talmud says. I'm going to share the text here from the Talmud in Sanhedrin. He says, the sages taught, the people of Sodom became haughty and sinned due only to the excessive goodness that the Holy One, blessed be He, bestowed upon them. Right? They had all these natural resources, but that made them haughty. What is written concerning them, indicating the goodness. The quote from Job, from Eov: "As for the earth, out of it comes bread, and underneath it is turned up as if it were fire. Its stones are the place of sapphires, and it has dust of gold. That path no bird of prey knows, neither has the falcon's eye seen it. The proud beasts have not trodden in it, nor has the lion passed thereby." Quote from Job. What is the reference? It's to the city of Sodom, which was later overturned. As it is stated thereafter, he puts forth his hand upon the flinty rock. He overturns the mountains by the roots. That's the next verse in Job, in Eov. Okay, so this was their issue. They had all this beautiful abundance, and they did not want to share. Okay, now it's important to emphasize that the terrible evil, the great evil, starts with small evil. Right? The Mishnah in Ethics of Our Fathers in chapter 5 basically implies that the people of Sodom were not evil. And we'll read it soon inside. In other words, God doesn't create such horrific evil. These people were stingy, they were selfish. And they said, I want to live to myself. I want to have what I have, and you live your life. Right? We would say capitalism to the extreme version. I'm not responsible for myself. You're responsible for yourself. I take no responsibility for anyone else. I don't want to help anyone. But as the nature of extremism is that it gets worse, and they lost all direction. So if we open up Ethics of Our Fathers, Pirkei Avos, Chapter 5, he says, Mishnah 10, there are 4 types of people, different categories of people. One who says what is mine is yours, and what is yours is mine, is a bur, is a amaretz. He's foolish. Mine is yours is mine. He's mixed up. One who says what is mine, and what is yours is yours. This is a median characteristic. Right? Mine is mine, yours is yours. It's a good median. Beinoni. Others say that this is the character of a sodomite. So which is it? Is it a sodomite or is it a regular guy? I say, what's mine is mine, what's yours is yours. I'm a regular guy. Others say, no, this is a midas Sodom. This is, you belong to the people of Sodom. Right? So that's to say that this is midah beinin, this is a median, sounds like a reasonable argument. Why is this like a Sodom? So the way the Bartanura explains, the commentary in the Mishnah explains, it's not a contradiction. In the beginning, right, it starts off innocent. You say, okay, I'll do my thing, you do your thing. I'll have mine, you'll have yours. Don't disturb me, I won't disturb you. But that selfishness gradually turns into a level of Sodom. It starts off, I live my life, you live your life. But then eventually the selfishness, the stinginess turns into Sodom. You trap yourself in your greed, and you gradually lose your sensitivity to others. So that's what the Bartanur says. Mine is mine, yours is yours. I live my life, you live your life. Sounds okay. But it's close to then becoming, to a degree, like the Sodom. Because you become accustomed to it, and therefore you're not gonna, you don't want your friend to have anything, even if it's not on your, even if you don't have to lose anything by it. Rabbi Lau, former chief rabbi of Israel, in his commentary on the ethics of our fathers, has a nice idea that he reads over here. He says, you know what the difference between being regular, median versus Sodom? He says, look at the words that the Mishnah says. He says, one who says what is mine and yours is median. Then he says, V'yesh omrim, others say. He says, if it's one person who says, ha'omer shali, shali, shalach, shalach, if it's only one individual who's selfish or stingy, that's median. It's okay. Society will function, no problem. The problem becomes when everyone has that attitude. Then you turn into Sodom. Then you become then the situation is not salvageable. So this is the people of Sodom. This was their background. And because they took it to an extreme, they were forced to perfect their cruel methods, right? Because the reality is that naturally many people are kind people, are good people. So some people are more selfish, some less, but in order to ensure their extreme view of selfishness and stinginess, they had to put in strict decrees to make sure people who are more compassionate are going to fall into line. So the Talmud goes at length to describe the terrible evilness that they did. Let's read a couple of examples here, the Talmud. This is a continuation of the same section of the Sanhedrin. He says, the Gemara continues, the Talmud discusses the sins of the people of Sodom. It says they had beds on which they would lay their guests. When a guest was longer than the bed, they would cut him. And when a guest was shorter than the bed, they would stretch him. Eliezer, the servant of Abraham, happened to come there. They said to him, come lie on the bed. He said to them, I took a vow that since the day of my mother died, I do not lie in a bed. That's how he was saved. When a poor person, another description, when a poor person would happen to come to Sodom, each and every person would give him a dinar. And the name of the giver was written on the dinar, on the coin. And then they would not give him or sell him bread. So he could not spend the money and he would die of hunger. When he would die, each and every person would come back and take their dinar. This was the level of evilness that it turned into. Didn't start that way, but that's what it was. That's what it became. Okay? And the climax of this evilness, in other words, when God comes to Avraham after Avraham is departing from the angels, and God says, "I want to tell Avraham what's going on." You know what does the Torah describe? Let's look in the verse. The Torah describes. He says, Hashem says, "Since the cry of Sodom and Gomorrah has become great, their sin has become very grave. The cry pierced the heavens." What was the climax of this cry? Here's how the Talmud describes what happened. The last section of the Talmud that we read. There's much more. I'm just choosing a few sections. It says there was a young woman who would take her bread out to the poor people in a pitcher so that the people would not see it. She would conceal it. The matter was revealed, and they smeared her with honey and positioned her on the wall of the city. And the hornets came and consumed her. And that is the meaning of that which it's written. And Hashem said, because the cry of Sodom and Gomorrah is great. And Rabbi Yehuda said, that's an allusion to the matter of the young woman who was killed for her act of kindness. Rabbah and Riva, the idea of great, that the cry was great, and Riva is the young woman who was killed for her kindness. So that's an allusion to that idea. That was the climax of this cry. That's what it led to. Okay, so this cry ascends to heaven, and God decides there's no hope for this place. I have to destroy the city. Sometimes the evil has to be torn out from its roots. But before Sodom is destroyed, we have one more task: to help Lot and his family escape. Okay, Lot was related to Avram. We learned last week he was both his nephew and his brother-in-law. Okay, Lot was the son of Haran. Haran was Avraham's brother who died in Ur-Kasdim in the fire by Nimrod, which we talked about last week. And he was a brother of Sarah. Sarah was married Avram. Avram was her uncle. Okay, so Lot was very much related to Avram. It seems like Lot was probably like a weak, fickle character type. Right. On one hand, he was Avram's nephew. He was influenced by his upbringing. We see later that he actually sacrificed very much just to feed and shelter the angels. This was a characteristic that he learned from Avram: kindness to others. But on the other hand, he definitely had some of the selfishness where he felt at home in Sodom. He loved money, so he couldn't stay with Avraham. Right? When him and Avram, their space wasn't big enough for both of them. He needed more, so he parted from Avram. He goes elsewhere. He chooses a city that suits him. The commentaries talk about that his wife was known either as Idit or Irit. Was the daughter was from the region of Sodom. That's probably why he was allowed to enter that area. And slowly he climbed the ranks and became a very influential person in Sodom. He was a judge. He was the arbitrator of the mafia that took place in that was going on there in Sodom. But nevertheless, God decides he's going to save Lot. The commentaries bring different reasons, possibilities, whether this was just in the merit of Abraham, not because Lot deserved it, but because he was related to Abraham. So in the merit of Abraham, he was saved. Rashi points that out. However, Rashi also says that that it's possible that he had merit himself, because when Paro, when Avram and Sarah told Paro that Sarah is his sister, Lot didn't give it away. And there's other commentaries point out perhaps a different reason. However, whatever the case is, God decides he's going to save Avram. So in the middle of the night, the angels arrive, and we had a whole situation that took place. But the bottom line is, they gather the family and they tell them to leave the city before the disaster happens. We're going to all leave together. His married daughters and sons-in-law do not want to leave. So Lot ends up leaving, escaping together with his wife and the two younger unmarried women. And here is where we get to our story, where the angel tells the family on their way out, do not turn around. Let's read inside these verses that describe the situation. Okay, so here's our parsha here. Sorry, this one right here. It says, a little further back, okay? Starting in the morning, okay? So Lot was tarrying. The men took hold of his hand and his wife's hand and the hand of his daughters, out of the Lord's pity for him. They took him out and placed him outside the city. And it come to pass when they took them outside, and he said, flee for your life. Do not look behind you. Do not stand in the entire plain. Flee to the mountain lest you perish. They told him not to look around, turn around. Then there was a discussion back and forth, but let's go back. Let's get here to the end, to verse 25. God turned over the cities and the entire plain and all the inhabitants of the cities, the vegetation of the ground. And his wife looked from behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. That was the end of the story. Then we go back to Avram, and later we talk about where Avram sees the destruction, and then we talk about Lot's daughters. Okay, so this is the verse 26. And his wife looked from behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. Okay, that's the verses that describe what took place. So the Torah emphasizes Lot was delaying to go out; he wasn't rushing out. But Yismamea, right? On one hand, he was wavering. to say goodbye to his city. He lived here 25 years. He attained great rank. This is where his wife came from. This is where he prospered. We talked about that when in the Torah reading. When we read the Torah, there are cantillations, there's notes, and the notes are connected to the words. The note under the word Vayismamea, the cantillation, I'll show you here in the, I'm not sure if it shows up no, this doesn't show the cantillation, but the word Vayismamea in the Torah, and the way, here you can see actually the little zigzag on top of the letter Mem. I don't know if that's clear. So that is a very uncommon note in the Torah. There's only 4 of them in the entire book. Usually the notes repeat themselves, different patterns. It's very uncommon. And in every case where it's found in the Torah, it connotes an idea of wavering, where things are uncertain, where when Yosef was being seduced by his master's wife, it says that Yosef wasn't sure, we had the same note. Every time in the Torah we have that note, it shows that there's very strong debate within the person that it's describing. So in this case, it's very well understood that Lot was wavering. Right? Should I go to the unknown with the angels, or maybe I should stay here with my neighbors? Maybe this whole thing's not going to happen, or maybe I should die with them. And the angels schlep him out. They command him to speed up. Don't look back. Lot's wife can't control herself. And she turns around and turns into a pillar of salt. Okay, the Talmud interprets this as literal, right? That literally she turned from a human being into an inanimate object to a block of salt, and that still stands till today. In the Talmud, there are 2 halachic references to this concept, to this strange phenomenon of a human being who became inanimate. When we say that it has a halachic reference, in other words, the Talmud is taking it as a literal story that happened, and that has an impact halachically on a person who comes into contact with this pillar of salt. Okay, one area where the Talmud talks about this is regarding to blessings. This is in the Talmud of Brachas. Let's read it inside here. It says the Talmud, the sages taught in a brisa a list of places where one is required to recite a blessing due to miracles that were performed there. And he lists different miracles. One who sees the crossing of the Red Sea, where Israel crossed, and the crossings of the Jordan, where the Jewish people crossed into the land of Israel. The crossings of the streams of Arnon, the hailstones of El Gavish on the descent of Beit Haron. That's a miracle that took place in the battle with Yehoshua and the Amorites. The rock that Og, king of Bashan, sought to hurl upon Israel, and the rock upon which Moshe sat when Joshua waged war against Amalek, and Lot's wife, and the wall of Jericho that was swallowed up in its place. If someone comes across any of these things, possibly, on all of these miracles, one must give thanks and offer praise before God to make a blessing. So the Torah is talking about if somebody sees this pillar of salt, they should make a blessing. Now the Talmud asks, why are we offering praise? If someone died here, this person, it's a tragedy. What's this a blessing? It's not the crossing of the sea, it's a miracle, but it's not a positive miracle. And the Talmud answers, there's a whole back and forth, but the Talmud resolves it and says as follows. The Gemara says, but the Brisa teaches that for all of these, one must give thanks and offer praise. The Talmud answers, the language of the Brisa should be amended. Over Lot and his wife, one recites 2 blessings. Over his wife, he recites, blessed the true judge, and on Lot he recites, blessed who remembers the righteous. Okay, so this is the discussion that the Talmud has, where we're just talking about literally somebody who is coming across this pillar of salt. That's one area where we see this, right? And it's like we pointed out at the beginning of the class that it's extremely interesting that this pillar of salt that was Lot's wife is the only one of any of these miracles, or any miracle that we know of, or any situation from the Talmud, from the Bible, from the Torah, that there's possibility that still exists, that we know where it is today. Whether it is this or not, but at least in the times of the Talmud, it seems like there was a place where it was a possibility. Okay, there's a second occasion in the Talmud where he talks about the laws of impurity. Okay, one knows when you come into contact with a dead body, you attain ritual impurity. So the Talmud asks the question: if somebody touches the pillar of salt, do you become ritually impure? Do you become tameh? Is it a human body? Is it a human corpse? And the response of the Talmud, the people of Alexandria asked Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanania, I'm just reading you the quote, says, Lot's wife, what is it? Does it make one impure? And the answer was no. The answer is that it's a salt. It's no longer a body. A dead person makes someone tameh, but a pillar of salt is not mitame, it doesn't make one impure. Okay. So that's another case where the Talmud talks about the question about the pillar of salt as a halachic question to know what one should do. Okay, so all of this is the story that we read. That's what happened. Okay, so again, we want to understand what is the problem of looking back. Why did Lot's wife get punished by looking back? Why salt? Where does salt even come into the picture? And also, if you take a look, another interesting point here, just one little emphasis here, that if you go back to the parsha and you look at the words here, he says, and his wife looked from behind him. Doesn't say she looked behind herself, she looked behind Lot. What? Who's him? Who is she looking behind? She turned around behind, in other words, looked backwards or looked over him. What does it mean, looked behind him? So that's also something that's not so clear here. Okay? And so what's Rashi's response? Let's see what Rashi takes from this whole story. Without going through each one inside, but I'll just tell you what Rashi's response is. Okay? Rashi's response is, he says, what's the reason? Why should Lot and his family not turn around, look backwards? He says, because the truth is that you guys deserve to perish just like they did. You're sinners just like they are. You're being saved. It's enough that you're being saved. Don't look back at what's going on over there. That's what Rashi's response is. Then she says, what does it mean that she looked behind him? Behind Lot. She looked over Lot, is what happened. Why does she turn into a pillar of salt, says Rashi? Because she did not want to give salt to her guest. When Lot brought in the angels, he served them food, and he wanted to give them some salt to have some flavor to their food. And she's refused. It's bad enough that you're bringing guests in my house. You want to treat them nicely too? In this place of Sodom? Absolutely not. So she's being punished with salt because she sinned with salt. This is how Rashi addresses this issue. Okay, but it definitely needs some more clarification here. Okay, looking back, maybe she didn't deserve to get saved. She looked back, but to such a degree, to such horrific punishment. And what's the emphasis? Why is she looking behind Lot and not behind herself? And why salt? If she refused to give them salt, she probably refused to give them pepper too. And she probably refused to give them some, olive oil or whatever other dressings or so why salt specifically? So other commentaries say that salt was really part of the punishment of Sodom. And since she was part of the people of Sodom and she turned back, right, as an expression that she wants to be with them, so she was punished with the punishment of Sodom. Now, the issue is that when you open up our Parsha and you read through everything that God does to the city of the land of Sodom and how he destroys it, he doesn't mention salt anywhere. It doesn't say salt. So these commentaries are saying, why does she turn into salt? Because she became punished with the people of Sodom. One of the commentaries even say, when she says she turned back, she never really even made it all the way out. So she just became like everything else. Everything turned into salt. But our Parsha doesn't say salt. So they point to a verse in Deuteronomy, in Devarim, all the way at the end of the Torah, when Moshe is telling the Jewish people about the curses or things that are going to befall them if they don't keep the bris, if they don't keep the covenant with God, he says, sulfur and salt have burned up the entire land. He uses the word melach, salt. And it's not going to be sown, it can't grow. And then he says it's going to be just like the overturning of Sodom and Amorah, Admah and Tzvoim, those 4 cities, which God overturned his fury and his rage. So over there, he alludes that in Sodom, part of the punishment, the sulfur turned, the transformation of Sodom was mixed with salt. Right? And that's the reality of today. The Dead Sea is there, it's full of salt. And either, according to some, a cloud of salt came down from the sky along with the sulfur, or maybe the heat of the fire that burned Sodom evaporated the water and only salt remained. That's another theory out there. But be it as it may, the salt destroyed the crops, the treasures, the natural resources, made it into a wasteland. So the wife of Lot was punished with the punishment of the city. That's what one of the commentaries called the Bechor Shor, was one of the medieval French rabbis, lived, around the time of Rashi, a little bit later, the Tosfot. So the Bechor Shor says that what does it mean that she looked back? That Batabet Ishta, that Lot's wife looked back. It means she was refusing. She was stalling. She wasn't hastening to go. She wanted to stay in the city, so she didn't actually make it out. It's not like she left and turned around from a distance. He says she never really fully made it out, and therefore she turned into whatever everyone else turned into. That's how he explains it. The difficulty with this commentary is that the Torah doesn't mention salt in our parsha at all. So he mentions sulfur and everything that happened to the city, and then all of a sudden we talk about Lot's wife, she turned into salt. Like the first time salt is mentioned. Should have said she got punished like everyone else got punished. She got destroyed like everyone else got destroyed. So the commentary it's still a difficult read to understand that in our parsha. Now let's add one more element here, right? When we talk about salt and how important salt is in Jewish life. In the Beis HaMikdash, in the temple, they would bring salt with every sacrifice. Not only with the animal sacrifices, even the sacrifice, even it went with flour or matzah, anything that was brought on the altar had to be put with salt. And it was preferably salted from both sides. Okay. So salt was important in the temple in times of karbanis, in the time of sacrifices. If it didn't have salt, it was a problem. Okay, because of that, today, on every table, which resembles like the shulchan, the altar, we have a mini table in our own homes. Every table has salt on it. That's one of the reasons why we dip the challah in salt, or we dip bread in salt. So this is really a big part of our of Jewish life. Salt plays an important role. The Tzemach Tzedek, the third Lubavitcher Rebbe, brings that the word melach, the word salt in Hebrew is melech, mem lamed chet. Okay, there's 3 other, or maybe even more, but let's 3 other words that share the same letters. They're made up words that are made up of the same letters in different order. Chalom, a dream. The root word of chalom, of dream, is ches lamed mem. Chamal, which means to have mercy, compassion. Ches mem lamed, the same root word. Machol, to forgive, is also ches lamed mem. Okay, so the Tzemach Tzedek points out that when we talk about dream, chalom, dream refers to the highest of all points, sort of like it's rising. A dream is beyond. Okay, so the idea of salt has the virtue of elevating. It elevates the sacrifice. It brings it to a highest point. And when the sacrifice is brought to the highest point, that's when God has mercy Chamal, that's when he has mercy upon us. And then Mechol, then he forgives us. So the salt is integral, is so important to the sacrifice. It brings the sacrifice to the highest point. It brings the mercy which allows God to forgive us. And now, at the other hand, so this salt, which has the wonderful virtue of compassion, of forgiveness, becomes the coffin of Lot's wife. How do we put that together? There's one commentary, a Kabbalist, brings in a book of Kabbalah, and it's called Gilgul HaNeshamos. So it's written by a famous Kabbalist. His name was Rabbi Menachem Azaria of Fano. He lived in Italy around the same time of the Arizal was in Tzvas. He was a student of the Ramak, of Rav Moshe Cordovero, a very famous Kabbalist, wrote many books. And in his Sefer, in his book of the Gilgul Neshamas, he brings down that one of the reasons we dip salt in challah and salt today is to remember this story, to remember Lot's wife who turned into salt. And he says one of the reasons in the temple all the sacrifices needed salt was to remember the story of Lot's wife. He connects it directly to this idea, which is really contradictory. So the Kli Yakar explains this as follows. Let's look, really a beautiful idea that he brings out. That really what happens over here is when we talk about Lot and his wife, there's a huge argument that goes on here. There's a huge disagreement. How do we view charity? How do we view kindness to others? Is charity an expense? Is it a waste? Or is it an income? Is it gain? And in a way, it's very much compared to salt. Okay, salt, this was Lot's perspective. Salt, in and of itself, is bitter, it's hard, it's unpleasant to eat. Try to eat salt. What happens when you mix it into a dish? It transforms it. It becomes a gift. It preserves the food. It seasons the food. It turns it, it becomes something completely different. So Lot wants to give the angel salt, right? He's arguing that this is what giving is like. The act of giving itself maybe is bitter. You're depleting your assets. But he says when you view it as a whole, as part of your whole income process, it actually preserves your assets. It preserves it. It serves as a seasoning that opens the gates of heaven for yourself. In the long run, you're benefiting yourself. You're not depleting yourself. It preserves your income. So this is a disagreement. Lot, on the other hand, snatches the salt away. He says, no, don't give any salt. She believes that giving is not like salt. Giving is just bitter. Right? Her argument was short, much easier to look at things in a short term. Many times, negative things, negative habits are instant gratification. They feel good in the moment. Or giving hurts in the moment without looking at the long view, without looking at the long-term investment that bears fruit in the future. That if you live in a society where everyone's selfish, you're going to destroy yourself. That giving in the long term creates a much better life for everyone. But she looks at it as bitter. She doesn't see the benefit that salt brings. She says, no salt. So what's God's response? Pillar of salt, right? God turns her into a salt and leaves that symbol till our very day to remind us of the secret of salt. That charity, that tzedakah, that giving is a wonderful spice. It gives fruit. It's not an expense. Right? It opens the gates to heaven. So this is what the Kli Yakar says. Kli Yakar actually bases it on the Talmud. Fascinating Talmud. The Talmud, which is connected with stories about the destruction of the Second Temple, story that happened. So the Talmud describes here. I have the quote here. This is what the Talmud says. Sorry, that was the Talmud of Brachos. Here we go. The Talmud says as follows. This is talking about what was going on in Jerusalem during the time when they were under siege of the Romans, shortly before the destruction of the temple. There was one of the wealthiest person was called Nakdimon Ben Gurion, and he lost his entire money. So it talks about what happened. He says the story that happened involving Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. He was riding on a donkey and leaving Jerusalem, and his students were walking after him to learn from him. He saw a certain young woman who was gathering barley from among the dung of the animals of Arabs. She was so poor that she subsisted on the undigested barley within the dung. When she saw him, she wrapped herself in her hair, as she had nothing else with which to cover herself, and stood before him. She said to him, "My teacher, sustain me." He did not recognize her, so he said to her, "My daughter, who are you?" She said to him, "I am the daughter of Nakdimon Ben Gurion." He said to her, "My daughter, the money of your father's household, where did it go? How did you become so poor?" She said to him, "My teacher, is it not that they say such a proverb in Jerusalem?" Here's the words: Melach mamain cheser. Salt for money is lacking. In other words, there is nothing with which to preserve it and prevent it from being lost. Money doesn't have salt to keep it together. That's the proverb. Money doesn't have salt to preserve it. Some say the proverb said a little bit different. It says melach mamain chesed, meaning salt for money, using money for acts of kindness preserves it. That the melach, the salt for money, what preserves money? Chesed, when you do kindness for it. So he continued to ask her, the money of your father-in-law's house. His father-in-law was wealthy too. Her father-in-law was wealthy too. Which was used for benevolent acts. He did do chesed. Where is it? She said to him, this one came and destroyed that one. All the money was combined and it was all lost together. So the Kli Yakar quotes this Talmud. Those words that salt emphasizes, right? That salt, that what preserves money? Chesed, kindness, tzedakah. How does spending turn into income? How does that work? Right? How does charity season the money and allow it to be preserved? Because ultimately, tzedakah is making God a partner in your business. God entrusted you with the ability to help others. So charity is transferring to a needy person what was given to you in advance for that purpose. It's not taking it out of your own pocket, something that you deserve, and I'm giving it to someone else. You're the banker. God entrusted you to be the banker in order to give what needs to be given. God wanted a world where there's a giver and a taker. There should be kindness. And he trusted you to be a giver. God provides for all creatures, for everything in the world. The question is how it gets there. He doesn't throw money from the sky that everyone should get. God creates a world where some have more, some are more fortunate, and some are less fortunate. Don't think it happened on its own because you are some great, mighty person that made. God gave you the blessings. So when God sees that the rich man functions as a loyal banker and gives what should be given, then God is going to increase your income too, that you should have more to give. And if you're withholding your income, then maybe he's going to decide you're not a good banker. So ultimately, it's a good investment. This is showing that you're doing your job properly. If we go back to the Mishnah that we quoted regarding the 4 types of people, the Rebbe points out a very important element here, a important idea. But go back to that Mishnah again. Hold on 1 second. Let me find the quote in the Mishnah. Remember, there are 4 types. We only did the first 2. The first one is a mixed up guy. What's mine is yours is mine. He's a bur. One who says what is mine and what's yours is yours. We talked about that, was started as a median character, goes to Sodom. Then look at the last two. One who says what is mine is yours and what is yours is a chassid, pious person. Great, everything is yours. And one who says what is mine and what is yours is wicked. The whole world belongs to me. What you have is mine, what I have is mine. You're wicked. That's the Mishnah says, 4 types of people. So the Rebbe asks a question on the last option. Someone who says what's mine is mine and yours is yours, how does it even fit into the Mishnah? It's such a corrupt way of thinking. How is it even a normative? It says there are 4 types of people. How is that even a normative type of person? And in fact, Maimonides writes in his introduction to Ethics of Our Fathers that the word that Pirkei Avos is milei de chasidusa. It's about teaching the pious ways. In other words, we're talking about going beyond the letter of the law. Beyond the letter of the law, where does such a type of personality even fit? He doesn't belong in the book. Someone who's so corrupt and evil to think that what's in your house also belongs to me. What kind of attitude is that? So the Rebbe says that you have to read the Mishnah correctly. Ha'omer shali shali b'shalach shali. You're saying, we're not talking about that someone who's acting this way. No way. We're not talking about someone who's actually stealing and going and trying to take what's yours and saying that it's mine and making it his. We're talking about an attitude, right? A subtle attitude, a subconscious attitude, someone who's saying, a person who wonders to himself and reflects. He's not touching a penny that doesn't belong to him. But what is he saying is what's mine is mine and what's yours. In other words, the charity that I'm giving, I don't think it's really yours. I think it should really be for me. In other words, I'm giving it away and it's really mine and I'm giving it to you. So he says, you're not an evil person, but for a chassid, that's already Russia. That's already not a proper attitude to have. But we're not talking about someone who's completely corrupt. We're talking about someone who's giving charity. But what's your perspective? What's your viewpoint? Your viewpoint is you're looking at it as it's mine. I have to give, okay, I'm giving it reluctantly to you, but I'm looking at it as mine, as opposed to saying God entrusted me with the ability to help others. And what's the chassid? The chassid is the one who says what's mine is yours and what's yours is yours. You can say that's a foolish person. He's giving everything away. Again, says the Rebbe, it could be it's someone who has nothing to give even. It's an attitude. Someone whose attitude is what's mine is meant to be helping others. What's yours, what's meant for you is yours. And what I have is also meant to help others with. So we're talking about a completely different attitude. So going back to our story, right? Says the Kli Yakar, this is what happened, right? Let's go back to our question. So now we see what the idea of salt represents. Salt represents the problem with Sodom. Sodom was a place of selfishness where people turned into a situation where they thought helping others is depleting themselves. They were missing the key ingredient of salt. Okay? Why was there such a prohibition for Lot and his family to turn around? So the Kli Yakar says the Torah is trying to teach us what happened with Lot's wife. Lot's wife, she ran away from Sodom, but Sodom was still inside of her. She never really left. She went out of Sodom, but Sodom didn't go out of her. On one hand, she's running away. She's geography. She's moving. She's running away from the past. But on the other hand, she's still worried what's going to be tomorrow. She's thinking to herself, what's going to happen? Where am I going to have my sustenance from? What's going to happen after Lot dies? I'm going to be alone with 2 daughters. The world is destroyed. So even at the same moment where she's running for her life, she's looking back. She's already still thinking. And she looks back. She looks over Lot. She looks back over Lot. In other words, she's thinking back to herself, what's going to happen after Lot? She turns around to look behind Lot. What's going to be after Lot? What's going to happen after he dies? Where am I going to live from? So she keeps on with the same mentality. The idea is that sometimes when we run away from certain situations, right? We face crisis, we face difficulties, and we run away. It's sometimes good. We need to leave. We got to go away from. It's not enough to physically run away or to run to a different geographical area, but there's the emphasis over here not to turn around. Not it's you could change your clothing, your head is still the same, the body is still the same. It's not enough to just run locations, but you have to really shift the way you see things, the way your perspective is. That's the way the Kli Yakar answers that question. And I'll just conclude with one idea that the Rebbe points out in a couple of letters, a couple of places. The Rebbe talked about this often, based on the same Talmud, the same quote, where we talk about that salt is a preservative for money. In other words, chesed, kindness, preserves money, just like salt is a dish that you sprinkle a little here, a little there, a little in the fish, a little in the meat, a little in the soup. It's not a lot concentrated in one place. The Rebbe talked about the idea that when you give charity, it's more impactful to give a little at a time. In other words, every day to do the mitzvah, put a couple of coins in the tzedakah, to attain this habit of ingrained tzedakah in your day-to-day activities. That changes you. It makes it part of your life. So yeah, you can write a check once a year and it's a great mitzvah. But if you can, besides doing that once a year or twice a year or the end of the tax year or a special high holidays occasion, but to ingrain yourself with this mitzvah tzedakah, a little salt here, a little salt there. You don't want salt to just be on one dish. You want the salt to be in your everyday, a little bit here, a little bit there, to have this idea of constantly giving, because that becomes ingrained and makes it part of your life. So that's the perhaps we could say that the connection idea that it's on your table, right? The salt is on our table. The salt is an important reminder in our everyday life. Should be a constant on our minds. Okay, we'll conclude with that. Wish everyone a great Shabbos. Just a reminder that we are starting our new JLI course this Sunday morning. We're going to have our first class in person at 10 o'clock, and then on Tuesday evening on Zoom. We'd love to have everyone join. Whoever wants to try it out, they can join in person or are on Zoom. The topic of the course is all the questions you ever had about God, whether they're philosophical questions, emotional questions. Really should be very, very interesting, exciting course. I'd love to have everyone join, and we'll be back, God willing, next Thursday night again with the next Torah studies class. So I think that's all the announcements, and I'll open it up for questions and comments. Please feel free to unmute yourself if you want to ask or comment on something. Yes, Babud.
Thank you, Rabbi Pinzon.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Yes, John.
Rabbi Pinson, Gishmak.
Yes, Rabbi.
Yes.
I have a question. Does Lot's wife have a name?
So her name is not mentioned in the Torah. I believe commentaries or the Medrash, I'm not sure exactly what the source is. Some say her name was Idit, Idis, or Iris, Irit. So those are names that I saw as mentioned.
And what's more interesting is, why isn't it mentioned? Why doesn't she have a name?
Mm-hmm. Why is her name not mentioned? It's excellent, good question. I don't know. I haven't seen that addressed. So we'll have to. We still got more to learn.
And I would like to go back a couple of lessons back to the Tower of Babel.
Okay.
And it seems that we have once again gotten to the point where we can literally rise into the heavens, this time via space flight. And I'm curious if there is any halakha that addresses this situation.